Well, let's go ahead and get started then. I'll get us started off by praying. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for today. Thank you for bringing us through it and giving us the chance to meet together and study your word together. And pray that you bless that time tonight as we start to look at Moses and Aaron as they interact with Pharaoh and kind of start this series this summer. And just pray that you would help us to see what you want to teach us from it. In your name I pray, amen. Okay, so last time we spent quite a bit of time talking about that little episode on the trip towards Egypt where the Lord was either seeking to put Moses to death or Gershom to death because of the circumcision thing. And went back in Genesis and looked at that actual process, that symbol, that seal of the covenant, and how that relates to the covenant within the context of these Hebrews, these Israelites, as they come out of Egypt. And of course, they're learning a lot about this material as they hang out there around Mount Sinai. And the stuff that God's trying to teach them, even in this section, essentially relates to that, the Ten Commandments and some of the other things that he's trying to make sure they understand. So let's pick up in verse 27. And we won't read everything we're going to cover tonight, but let's read a little bit and then talk about it, and then we'll go back or keep going. So the Lord says to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him to speak and all the signs that he had commanded him to do. And then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of those people. The people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So true to his word, and this is where we had essentially left off in April, remember, was in that conversation at the fiery bush. I think it was the third or the fourth, but it was the excuse in the excuses section where Moses says that I don't know how to speak good. So God had gotten a little bit irritated at him, says, okay, we'll let Aaron do the talking for you. All right. So probably at that point, Aaron is when the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness and meet Moses. Moses goes back home to Jethro's house. It's probably several days as he gets ready and then leaves Midian or the house in Midian and starts heading towards Egypt. And you'll notice that the place where they meet, I don't think is an accident, but in verse 27, it says that Aaron went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And so we know that that meeting place is Mount Horeb. And remember, that was the mount where Moses was taking care of the sheep that day that he ran into the fiery bush. And so this is, and as we'll see later, this is an important mountain. It's an important location. We know that it's close enough to the home in Midian that it's probably somewhere further away from Egypt than it was. So Aaron probably traveled probably about a week to get here. And we think at this time, obviously, we talked about this a little bit last time as to how this might have played out, but we think at this time they're still close to Midian. It's probably likely that Zipporah and the two boys headed back home and did not then go on with Moses and Aaron to Egypt. And we don't know that for sure, but we do know, of course, that later when they arrive in Midian, the area of Midian, that Jethro brings Zipporah and the two boys to meet them after the Exodus. So we just know that at some point they do head back home. Interestingly, we see Moses tell Aaron all of the words that the Lord had said. So remember, this was what God had been trying to get across to him in that conversation at the fiery bush. You're going to go and you're going to tell them this, you're going to do this, and you're going to say that I am going to do these things. So Moses tells Aaron all these words, and notice that he also performs the 2 signs. And so we don't get any details about how that plays out, but of course the 2 signs were throw the staff down, and it turns into a snake, and the leprosy, you put your hand in the robe, it comes out leprous. So we don't know if he did that to Aaron or whether he just stuck his own hand in and showed him the leprous spots when he pulled it out and then healed it again. So showed him those 2, probably told him about the 3rd one. And of course, remember, the 3rd one was not one we performed. It's one that we're keeping in reserve for later. So when it says all those signs, it would refer specifically to those 2. And then 29, we basically summarize what probably was a week's journey through pretty rough terrain. And basically Moses and Aaron went and gathered together the elders. So they've got to make their way from Mount Horeb all the way to Egypt. And there they gather the elders together. Now, I would kind of pause here and say that there's some interesting details here that do give us some, I think, some insight into how this relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites, the dynamics that was going on between those 2 groups. And that certainly is something that we sometimes can misconceive in our sort of American conception of what slavery might look like. And we've already talked about how the biblical, well, not so much biblical, but the ancient Near Eastern mechanisms and the ways in which these cultures set things up would not have necessarily fit those definitions for us. And I say that because Aaron could leave whenever he wanted, right? So it was not like these Israelites are locked into Egypt and can't head out and go visit. So the fact that Aaron had no pushback or no restriction on leaving the country tells you that they had some freedom to do the things that they wanted to do. The fact that they went and called the elders tells you that there was some structure in place for them to kind of govern themselves and take care of themselves, which would have probably been left over from when Joseph brought the family in and set them up in that area of Goshen where they were probably still living. And we'll see in the interaction with Pharaoh, here as we move into chapter 5, that the way in which Pharaoh interacts with them does not necessarily play in the same concept we might have as a ruler interacting with somebody who would be in servitude, as we might conceive that. There are specific reasons why he didn't want to let them go. And it had nothing to do at that point with the threat that he felt. Now, he did feel a threat, remember, earlier with the numbers of the Israelites, and that's why he was killing off the babies. That was 80 years ago, and that was a different Pharaoh. This Pharaoh did not feel that way. It's likely as well, we don't see it, but it's likely that in the exchange at Mount Horeb, Aaron probably got the staff. So Moses probably showed him the sign with the snake and then handed him the staff, or here, hold this, throw it on the ground, you do it, kind of thing. And we would expect that to happen simply because the next time the staff is going to make an appearance, Aaron is the one holding it. So at some point it had to be passed off. And we know from verse 30 that once they gathered all the elders together, who was doing all the talking? It says Aaron is the one that did all the speaking and performed the sign. So that would suggest that the staff was in his possession at this point. Okay. All right. Now, as this plays out, we also don't get a whole lot of detail on exactly how it worked, but we could probably, I mean, I hate to make some assumptions, but based on information that we get elsewhere, let's back up. Why did God give Moses those two signs? because in that excuse, like I think that was the third one. The fourth one was about not being able to talk well. But when he said, they're not going to believe me, and God said, well, here's two signs that they will believe you. So we don't know if they didn't believe, because really the only information we get is in verse 31 says the people believe, but this was after the signs were performed. So it's possible that they did not. And of course, with some of the events that are going to play out later, it is likely that they did not believe at that point, especially for how quickly they are going to give up hope as soon as things get a little bit tough. Actually, they're going to get a lot tough. Okay.
Moses and Aaron are at Mount Horeb.
That's where they met.
That's where they met.
And then a week later,
Maybe I'm missing some time.
yes, about 5 days, 5 to 7 days probably take place while they make their way to Egypt,
Okay, so
bring the elders together.
they're talking to each other. They are.
This is when he got that, the in front of the elders would be this. So
That's, and I understand, verse 28.
28 is just the two of them.
When you get to
29.
it says, then Moses and Aaron went and gathered all the elders of the people of Israel. How could that be?
Because between 28 and 29, they walked.
Did all of a sudden they were in Egypt?
No, they would have journeyed to Egypt.
Where were they at?
They were at Mount Horeb when they met.
And who would meet with them? Weren't they all in Egypt?
They had to make their way to Egypt. They had to make their way to Egypt from Mount Horeb. So somewhere between, no, somewhere between 28 and 29, not recorded for us, is the went. In 29, where it says, then Moses and Aaron went, that's a 5-day journey to Egypt. Egypt and gathered the elders. Yeah, so the gathering of the elders was in Egypt.
Gathering the elders when they got to Egypt.
Yes.
Okay. It's because it says they gathered all the people of Israel. I think, wait.
Yeah.
I'm understanding.
Sure. Yep.
Then that's Aaron. Then
Right.
that's
Well, he had to bring Aaron up to speed first. Then they traveled, and then this is when they interact with the elders.
It seemed like, my whole thought process is, they're at Mount Horeb. How can they gather all the people? We think when you write something, it's like right there.
And just as a reminder, if you go to chapter 3, verse 16, we actually hear what Aaron said. It says, go and gather the elders of Israel together, and this is what you will say. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And of course, remember back then, God had said, they will listen to your voice, and then all of you together will go to the king of Egypt and basically say kind of the same thing, but and we'll come back to that here in a second because we'll hit that in 5. But that would be what Aaron said to them, then did the signs, and they appear to have believed and responded with worship, bowed their heads and worshiped. Miles wise, it's hard to calculate because if you go straight there, we just don't know where the paths were, because when we start doing the Exodus, I'll show you some pictures of what the terrain looks like and why they sometimes had to go out of their way to get to where they were going. But the estimate would be probably maximum a week just the two of them. Maybe they were traveling a little bit quicker than that. I don't know.
Egypt first, Mount Horeb, and then they met place.
Well, Moses was in Midian with Zipporah and her family. In Midian, yeah, and Mount Horeb is close to Midian.
Right.
So they start their journey, and probably the very first night is where God stops them on the road and says, "You haven't been doing what you should have been doing with the circumcision thing." Okay, so we have that moment, probably right after the fiery bush episode. Aaron starts his journey this direction. So he would have left 2 weeks ago, comes to Mount Horeb, and Moses reaches Mount Horeb. They meet, they talk, and then together they return to Egypt. So yes, what you said would be Aaron. Moses goes from Midian to Horeb to Egypt. Yeah. All right. So in chapter 5, we get the second encounter. And again, this probably did not happen necessarily the same day, but all we know is that it happens afterwards. There probably were several conversations that had to be had. The news had to travel through the group. And we get this first encounter where Moses and Aaron are going to approach Pharaoh. We don't know whether, go back to that where we just were in chapter 3. Remember, it says, once you've talked, you and the elders go to Pharaoh. We don't know if the elders necessarily went with them, but it's a possibility they did, as we'll see here in a second. And he says they go to visit Pharaoh, and this is what Aaron says. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." So basically what he's asking here. And we know that in 3, and he probably did put this little detail in there. So in verse 18 of chapter 3, "They will listen to your voice, you and the elders shall go to the king and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness." So that little tidbit was not in that verse in chapter 5, but it probably was. He probably did say it because it does show up in the next one. And we're going to go into the 3 days and we will sacrifice to the Lord. And we see here that when God is talking to Moses, and Moses presumably told Aaron that the king of Egypt is not going to let you go. It's going to require me to get a pretty strong hand with him. Okay. And so they walk into Pharaoh's palace. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." So this is actually probably a worship festival that would have been fairly typical or common in these ancient Near Eastern cultures, where they would have these festivals or celebrations. Probably a really good example of what was planned is the description we have from the golden calf episode, where there's lots of celebration, lots of dancing. But in this case, it was going to be specific to the God of the Hebrews, not some golden calf with idol worship and other kinds of things. And so it's not, I guess I say that to say that this is not some weird request that Pharaoh doesn't understand. He understands what they're asking. Okay. His first response is what comes across in English as a question: "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go?" And that sounds like he doesn't really know who God is. And the chances are he doesn't know who God is, but this is not him talking out of ignorance. Okay. This is actually him. It's not so much a question as a statement. Who is the Lord that I should let you people go? So you catch the nuance there. Basically, and we'll see this play out multiple times during the plagues, that Pharaoh within this Egyptian culture is one of the gods. Okay. He is God in human form that is put in a position of leadership and would essentially be a divine vessel as he leads these Egyptians. So basically what he's saying is that this God you speak of, if he is a God at all, would be my equal. And there's really no reason for me to listen to him, right? He has no authority over me. So there is no reason for me to let his people go into the wilderness and celebrate. Okay. So that's kind of the nuance here, is who is the Lord that I should obey him? Basically, he's nobody. And as far as I'm concerned, I probably outrank him. And I'm more important than he is, therefore what I say goes. And it says, as he finishes off, I do not know the Lord. So he probably is true. I don't know who you're talking about. Because remember, this was a group that did not know Joseph anymore. So they would not necessarily have a memory of that. Joseph would have been probably 3 generations ago. But even if I did know who he was, I will not let Israel go. So the answer was no. Then they said in verse 3, and this is where it gets interesting, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Here we do get the reference to the 3 days. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. And what's interesting is Aaron adds this little phrase at the end, which does not appear in chapter 3, lest he fall upon us with pestilence and the sword. So if you don't let us go, God's going to attack us with some kind of a disease, a pandemic, and the sword, which I find extremely interesting, because the threaten with the sword can only come from where? Some kind of threat of violence. And if anything was going to threaten the Israelites in Goshen, then this ought to be something that Pharaoh was worried about, because that would be a threat to them as well. So not really sure why it's here, because as we look back in 3, you'll notice that God, at least in this, the way Moses records it for us, it does not say that. So you and the elders will go, verse 18, you and the elders will go to the king of Egypt, say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us go 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. And then God goes into, but I know the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled, and I will strike Egypt with all the wonders that I have in mind. And once I do all of that, he will let you go. So of course he's referring to the 10 commandments, or not 10, the 10 plagues there, not commandments, but the full plagues. And after those play out, then they will be free to go. Well, that's exactly how it plays out, because if we keep reading, the king makes it personal. He says to Moses and Aaron, so he addresses them by name, why are you taking the people away from their work? So that's why I think that the elders may have been there. And more importantly, I think Israel had kind of shut down, and they were thinking that obviously after these signs and this message, we're going. God's going to take us and we're going to do some neat things. This is going to be great. I don't think they were expecting Pharaoh to say no. So I'm guessing, just from the context, that Moses and Aaron didn't share with them the fact that Pharaoh's going to say no, because it does seem to surprise him a little bit. But he talks to Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And then he turns to his folks, behold, the people of the land are many, and you are making them, well, actually it says to them, behold, the people of the land are now many, talking about the Israelites, and you are making them rest. So then he turns to his people, the taskmasters, and says that basically we're going to make things a lot worse on them. Okay, verse 7. You shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks, as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made in the past, you shall impose on them. You shall by no means reduce it, for they are being idle. Therefore, this is why they have come to us crying about wanting to go out in the wilderness and worship some God that I don't even recognize. So, verse 9, verse 9, let's lay heavier work on them that they may labor, and while they are laboring, they will pay no regard to lying words. So how's it kind of playing out here? Is that he's basically saying that, and I think it comes back to that relationship that we're talking about earlier, that his worry is not that these slaves are going to escape. That's not in his mind. This is a business decision for him, and he's not going to let these many people go hang out in the wilderness for 3 days, because his bottom line is going to suffer from that. He was okay with Aaron leaving. He probably would have been okay with a few leaving here and there. They were free to come and go. But to take the whole nation for 3 days, I mean, that's a pretty big hit to his economy, and he's not willing to let that happen. And so, as any good authoritarian would do, he says, why are you wasting the people's time by filling their head with all of these images? And then he turns to the taskmasters and the foreman and says, all right, we're going to do things differently from now on. So I do think it plays out sort of like employers and employees. And I think the only thing that we could kind of maybe relate it to in our modern day concept would be as if and I can only relate it in the context of movies and stuff, but if you can kind of imagine how ownership responds if somebody comes in and wants to invite the employees to a union meeting. Let's get unionized. And basically the employer says, this ain't gonna happen, and I'll fire you all and replace you. And this is kind of that dynamic playing out, is that what Pharaoh is seeing is not so much a threat to the power of Egypt, but more to the economy of Egypt and these potential in the making of those bricks, which of course the structures were very important to the Egyptians in this culture. And those bricks were an important part of building those buildings. Does that make sense? Okay. Couple of well, this is that previous slide. So Pharaoh is not interested in who God is and does not agree. And like I said, he does add that phrase about God punishing them, not the Egyptians, but them, the Hebrews. So we're not sure exactly why that's in there. And Pharaoh then puts them back to work, makes the conditions harsher as a punishment. And basically what he's going to do is make them work harder to accomplish the same goals that they had originally. Okay. So the way in which this works is the job site would have had essentially three levels to it. Because you'll notice in verse 6. So sometime that same day, Pharaoh commands the taskmasters of the people and their foremen. So the 3 folks that would be working on site would be the taskmasters, the people, and the foreman of the people. So the taskmasters are Egyptians. The people, of course, are the workers. And the foreman would also be kind of the crew leaders, the Hebrew crew leaders, if that makes sense. And basically, the taskmasters are there just to kind of make sure the quotas are met and issue those instructions and so on. Of course, they're the ones that are also there with the, let's go to the next slide. They would, well, this is also more of a, rather than a image, this would be a sculpture of the making of bricks. I'll come back to this in a second. But here, this would be the process as it plays out. And the taskmasters would be the ones that you see with the rod. And they would be the ones that are there for overseeing. You can also see that they have slightly different clothing on, which shows that they're Egyptian within that culture. And then the foremen would be the ones in charge, and then the workers would be the ones that are tasked with making the bricks. Now, the making of the bricks at this point would have been the gathering of the mud, which you can kind of see in that mud pit. So this is actually, this is kind of zoomed in on that section of that wall. So this is an actual photo of the wall. And you can see the making of the bricks here. So they would lay them out, and they put it into these little boxes. And so they gather the mud, and then we'll mix the mud. You don't actually see the addition of the straw, but they would add straw to it and put the brick into these molds, and then lay the molds or empty the mold onto the ground and let the brick dry. And so here it just kind of shows the way that it goes into the building. And then we actually construct something like a pyramid structure from that. And this would be this would be a brick that was excavated, and you can definitely see the straw inside. So the straw is there to give it strength, tensile strength. So the kind of the same reason we would use like rebar in a building under concrete. So you pour the concrete, but the rebar is inside as the fibers to strengthen it. So the straw would be playing that role here in this. And in those parts of the world, they actually still make bricks this way, not just to maintain those buildings, the old buildings, but also to build new. And so the most efficient way for this to play out is what? You got this crew in place. Some of them are in the pit gathering the mud. Some of them are mixing the mud. Some of them are putting it in the molds. And then others are laying the molds out and helping them dry and so on. Okay. There would have been another part of this crew that would have brought the straw in from somewhere and put it at the site so that then those guys that are doing the mixing could put it in as they mix it. And we see that Pharaoh changes things up a little bit. In verse 7, you shall no longer give them straw to make bricks, as in the past. So up till now, the straw has been delivered to you on site, and you've been building your bricks, and you've had a quota that you have to abide by, as each crew would have to produce that number of bricks. Interestingly, he says, let them go and gather straw for themselves, but the number of bricks that they have made in the past, you shall impose on them. And by no means will we reduce it, because obviously they're idle to be asking us for this to begin with. They cry to us about going to offer sacrifices to their God. So we're going to put heavier work on them, that they may labor and pay no attention to Moses and his lying words, or Aaron and his lying words. Okay. So in verse 10, we see this process start to play out. So the taskmasters go, to the foreman of the people. So again, these Hebrew crew leaders. And then they went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I am not going to give you any straw. Verse 11, go and get straw yourselves. And this is where it gets tricky. Wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced even a little bit. So not even by one brick, when am I going to reduce your quota? In fact, he probably said that, thank me for not increasing it. But he left it where it was. And then we see how difficult the task became in verse 12. The people were then scattered throughout all of the land of Egypt to gather not just straw, but what are they looking for? Or what do they find? Stubble for straw. So chances are, I mean, we don't have any necessarily evidence for this, but chances are what the straw that Pharaoh was providing was probably manufactured. They grew it, harvested it, and delivered it over to these brick making places. So presumably, these folks would not have had access to that, to these fields. So they're having to go wherever they can find it. In fact, they might have been barred from going in to the fields where normally it would come from. And they're trying to find stubble along the side of the road that we can put into the bricks. We're going all over this land of Egypt. Now we'll see that that's probably not like miles and miles and miles, but they're wandering around trying to find whatever they can find to put into these bricks to strengthen them. So that quota is not just in the number of bricks we're making, but also the quality has to be maintained. If the quality were to drop off, also in trouble. And so we see that the people are struggling. They are trying to find whatever they can find. They're gathering the stubble. The taskmasters were urgent, verse 13, in saying, complete your work, the daily task, just as if there was straw. Okay, so they're yelling at them the whole time that y'all need to keep up. And so basically what Pharaoh did here was he took away this one resource that's not on site. They now have to go collect it themselves, and they're not allowed to go to the place where it would be easily found. They've got to scrounge it on their own and bring it in and still produce the same number of bricks that they had before. So obviously, what was the result? They didn't make it. They missed out, all right? And we see in 14 who had to pay the price, and the foreman of the people of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them. So the crew leaders, once they can't meet those quotas, they were beaten and were asked, why have you not done all your tasks in making of bricks today? And you didn't do it yesterday either, the way you have in the past. So we see the foreman here now, probably as a group or a larger group of them. In verse 15, they come to Pharaoh and they kind of cry out to him, why do you treat your servants like this? 16, no straw has been given to your servants, and yet they have been saying to us, make bricks. And now your servants are being beaten. But the fault is in your own people, meaning that they're not giving us the straw that we need. Okay. So they're basically asking Pharaoh, why are you doing this to us? And why are these taskmasters treating us this way, taking away our straw, telling us we have to keep the same quotas, and beating us when we can't accomplish that task? And Pharaoh answers, you are idle. It says it twice, you are idle. You are idle. That is why you said, of course, he's being facetious here, sarcastic. That is why you said, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go now and work. No straw is going to be given to you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. And so Pharaoh's answer is clearly showing them, why are you in trouble? Because Moses and Aaron came and asked for you guys to go out for 3 days and worship this God who I don't recognize. So obviously, if you've got time to fiddle around for 3 days, then you must have time to go get straw, bring it back to the site, make the bricks, and still make the same production that we had before, because you guys are idle. And we see the response to the foreman here. Okay. What do they say? Nope, this is Moses next. But the foreman says in verse 19, the foreman of the people saw that they were in trouble, because basically Pharaoh did not listen to them. You shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task each day. Now we see that their worry is probably about more than a couple of beatings as it plays out, because in verse 20 we see they come out of their audience with Pharaoh. They meet Moses and Aaron, who was waiting for them. So Moses and Aaron were outside waiting on them as they came out from Pharaoh, and they said to Moses, the Lord look on you and judge you, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants. And notice this last one, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Okay, so Miss Frenchie was right. If there was going to be a threat of the sword, it had to come from Egypt themselves. And it does appear that the foremen at least were worried that this is where this was headed. They knew that there was no way they were going to be able to meet that quota. And so tomorrow I was going to get a beating. Next day I was going to get a beating. But eventually Pharaoh and those taskmasters were going to ramp up the pressure, because they really had nothing to lose in their minds. And so these foremen are worried that the sword will eventually be next, and they're going to start killing us. And then new foremen will have to be put in place, and then they're going to get beaten and killed. And there's just no way for us to meet these requirements. And the reason we're in this predicament is because you came and made us stink to Pharaoh, right? You made him do this to us by asking these questions. All right. So we see Moses lose heart a little bit, because as soon as this interaction happens, we see Moses turn to the Lord, and what does he say? Why have you done this evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? Because since the day I came to Pharaoh and spoke in your name, he has done evil to this people. And this is where it really kind of, I don't know that I would have said this, but you have not delivered your people at all. Meaning you did not keep your promise. Now remember, this is somebody who God has already told him that Pharaoh is going to not listen to you, and it's going to take some time and a strong hand from me. Okay, I am going to strike him with wonders. So, I mean, this has probably been a couple of weeks, but for Moses to give up so quickly is I think, a little bit surprising here. This, I think, also shows us what I was referring to earlier about the people believing initially whether they needed to see the signs first or not. And the chances are probably pretty good that they did, just because of how quickly as soon as the pressure was on, they immediately blamed Moses and Aaron. And I think one of the main things that God is dealing with here is this conversation that the foremen have with Pharaoh. Why do you treat who? Your servants like this? No straw is being given to your servants. And behold, your servants are being beaten. So in their minds, they belong to Pharaoh. They're his servants. And they're trying to convince him that we're loyal. And we have done this job for you. And we worked for you. And now we're being treated unfairly. And so God's got to break them of that, because you can't be Pharaoh's servants. You have got to be my people. All right. And that's what we've been seeing come out of these conversations with Moses, is that you will go and tell the people of Israel that they are my people and I have heard them. And so this interaction, or this relationship that they have with Egypt, is one of the things that's going to have to be corrected. And is one that even after the Exodus, Moses and Aaron are going to have to deal with. Okay. All right. So chapter 6, we won't go through the whole thing tonight, but actually we don't really need to go to the whole thing, because we've already touched on the genealogy towards the end. And what we see in most of chapter 6 is essentially God giving Moses and Aaron a pep talk, right? Reminding them what he said a couple of weeks ago, that guess what? This is going exactly the way it was planned. I told you this was going to happen. And you just got to hang on and watch it play out.
And I just love it when he says, I am the Lord.
Mhm. So he says in chapter 6, all right, just hold on, because you're about to see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh. And with a strong hand, he is going to send them out, the people. And with a strong hand, he is going to drive you out of his land. You're not going to be able to get out fast enough by the time I'm finished. Okay. And Miss Ridge is right. In verse 2, we get these interactions where God reminds Moses that he is the God of the covenant, the I am, and he's going to essentially remind him of the 6 promises that he's made. Okay. Where we've got in 2, God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and Jacob as God Almighty. Okay, so remember that was the way he was identified to Melchizedek, or by Melchizedek to Abraham. By my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. So it was not till later that he established himself as Yahweh. I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, talking about those 3 patriarchs. And we saw some of that last week. And the land in which they have lived. So remember, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob all lived in Canaan for a while, but they did not own it. And in 5, moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves. And again, we kind of contextualize that to this particular context. I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the people of Israel, again, the I am, the Lord, shows up now a second time. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery. So that's the deliverance piece. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. So again, hang on, you're going to see some pretty mighty things. So I'm going to redeem you. And will, as I redeem you with these great acts, 7, I will take you to be my people. So this is kind of that, how the New Testament authors often refer to adoption as God's people. Here we see it stated within the context of the Israelites. Of course, we saw that play out in the conversation with Moses earlier. You remember over this circumcision thing where Israel is my firstborn. So we are part of, or they are part of God's family. This relationship. Remember how important relationships were to these cultures. I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I will provide the authority and the leadership for you. And I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. So I will guide you. Of course, we know from once they leave Egypt, we're going to have that column of smoke and fire that's going to go before them. And I will give it to you for a possession. So we see that, of course, later curses and blessings are going to be a really important part of this relationship of the Israelites with God as we lay all this out at Mount Sinai. And he finishing off with a third, I am the Lord. So he brackets these promises with the I am the Lord, I am the Lord. Who am I? Moses goes and tells the people, but they do not listen because of their broken spirit and the harsh slavery, these conditions that they have. Okay. So this is where we really start to see the where the Israelites, where their mind is, and how what is about to play out is not just for the Egyptians, but also for them. God has got to show them some things to get them to understand who they are as God's covenant people. And so we see that they may not really even know that he exists because they really had not probably seen him work on their behalf since Joseph's time. And God is really not, God has, obviously they're working towards that goal. Certainly the story of Moses tells us that God was not doing anything. They just haven't realized it until now. But basically, if they did know him, they just doubt whether he's got the power to bring us out of Egypt. And so that's why God's going to show not just the Egyptians with mighty acts. He's going to show these Israelites these mighty acts that are going to bring them out of Egypt. And of course, the broken spirit and this harshness comes from the fact that they forget how they were complaining beforehand. But at the moment, things are much worse because of Moses. And so they are really discouraged and have just, unfortunately, Moses came with this promise. They were excited, they worshiped, and now here we are a couple of days later, and most of our leaders have been getting beatings, and we're worried that it's not going to get better. Okay. Moses, of course, is discouraged by this. He still has doubts about whether this plan is actually going to work or not. But God then takes them and talks to them. And we see, as he talks to Moses in 10, the Lord says to Moses, "Go tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of his land." But Moses says, "Behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then is Pharaoh going to listen to me?" So the people that are supposedly your people haven't listened. And you think Pharaoh's going to listen, for I am of uncircumcised lips, just meaning that I don't know what to say. And obviously what I'm saying doesn't mean anything to these people. And in verse 13, but the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel, about the king of Egypt. to bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So we don't know exactly what he said. I mean, it had something to do with bringing the people out. So it sounded a lot like what they had been told before. But there must have been some conversation here that helped Moses and Aaron at least get strengthened up for the next day, or the next time they go before Pharaoh. And this is where we will begin those signs and wonders, and these plagues will begin to play out. Okay. So I think the take home we'll kind of end with this tonight is that I think what we can kind of learn from Moses here is that it is easy to get discouraged, especially when we've actually done what God told us to do. Right? What did God tell them to do? You're going to go to the elders. You're going to tell them these things. You're going to perform these signs. They're going to believe you. You're all going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to tell him these things. He's not going to listen. What he didn't tell him was that Pharaoh was going to react the way he did. Right? That Pharaoh was going to take away the straw, keep the quotas the same, start beating the foreman. So I think in Moses and Aaron's mind, they were thinking that, yeah, Pharaoh's going to say no. But the fact that it has gotten a lot worse is now outside of God's control. So you have not rescued your people, and things are a whole lot worse now. And you still want me to go talk to Pharaoh. So now I've actually lost both groups. I had this group over here, they were listening to me, but now I've lost both groups. And so them having to come to this realization, those signs and wonders are not just for the Egyptians, not just for the Israelites, but they're also for Moses and Aaron, especially to get them prepared for what comes next. Because as they are tasked with, and I think this is where we're get here in 13, they were given a charge about the people of Israel, is that I think they had to have begun to think about what comes next. It's not just getting Pharaoh to let us go. What happens after that? This is going to be a journey, a long journey. And they were tasked with providing the leadership for that particular journey. Okay. So we just need to be reminded that when God has given us a plan, we got to hang on. And even though things get tough from time to time, that doesn't surprise him. And especially in those cases where he has promised us to be everything we need, we can count on that. And we just have to wait, see how it turns out. It's a whole lot easier to say than do, but I think it's important that this kind of plays out this way, so that not just the Egyptians, not just the Israelites, but not just Moses and Aaron are supposed to learn something from this, but who else? Us. Yeah. So I think all of this is going to be an answer to the questions that we started to raise last fall as we started to dig into Genesis 1 and 2. Who is this God? What does he expect from us? And what is this relationship going to look like? Okay, because remember, Adam and Eve kind of screwed up that relationship, and we saw multiple generations. We left off that prehistory with the guys at the Tower of Babel, thinking that they were going to solve it this way, and God said, you are not going to interact with me that way. This is how we're going to interact with each other. And now we see that playing out as we're going to get to Mount Sinai and get those instructions about the tabernacle, instructions about the system by which humans and God will now begin to try to reconcile that relationship. Okay. And of course, it all points towards the ultimate redemption that we talked about last week. in that line of Abraham that eventually the offspring will provide the promise. Okay. All right. So next week, I put 7 through 12 up there. So obviously we're not going to cover all of that, but that's kind of my plan for the summer, is to cover these 10 plagues. And then hopefully by the fall, we'll be ready to hit the road and make our way to Mount Sinai through the Exodus. So, yeah. So next week is,
We'll leave that clear. We're not gonna leave
yeah,
it.
is VBS. And then I'm on vacation the week after that. And then the 4th is the Monday after that. So there's a possibility. Joy says I shouldn't think about this, but there's a possibility that maybe that Tuesday of the 5th, if nobody's in here, we might be able to do it, but sometimes they practice music, so we'll check on that.
You know what I think, I was just looking at when Moses did, he says, I am uncircumcised.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah.
It meant that I don't speak well.
I don't speak well, right?
It used uncircumcised with it.
And he said it again in,
He keeps going back to that.
yep, he says it again at the end of 6. In fact, that's the last verse before they go before Pharaoh again. And the Lord said to Moses, I am the Lord, tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said to the Lord, behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How is Pharaoh going to listen to me?
I was looking, referred back to Jeremiah 1:6, where it says, then said I, our Lord cried, behold, I cannot speak, for I am with you. Jeremiah. That's
Yeah,
what it referred back
yeah.
to. Yeah. Well, that was interesting how they made that connection.
And I think it's somewhat of a reference to, you remember with Isaiah, that unclean lips, and God was able to purify those. And, but remember, God answered this question back at that fiery bush, that I will give you the words to say. Are you saying, I don't know what I'm doing? And yeah. So again, I mean, it's kind of weird to me that Moses just does not paint himself in the best light here. And he's the one writing it. So you got to respect him for telling us the truth and letting us see the weaknesses that he had and the doubts that he had. And I think that's important for us, is that as he comes to terms with his own doubts and stuff, that helps us with ours. So, all right, well, let's pray and then we'll head out. Dearly Father, we just thank you again for this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better as you interact here with Moses and Aaron, and especially around this interaction with Pharaoh. And of course, it's easy for us to see the big picture and understand how it played out, and we can wonder how they would have doubted in the moment, but I'm sure the moment was tough, and we sometimes find ourselves in those kinds of moments, and pray that you would forgive us if we respond the way that they did, and help us to not help give us find the confidence to know that you're in control and in charge, and that you will always take care of us. In your name I pray, amen.